Hey folks, in this video we're going to be looking at Gitk, which is one of the original GUIs developed and distributed with Git. It's a 12,000 line TCL script which uses the TK GUI framework to drive its interface, which does mean it looks a little bit old and outdated, but it loads really quickly, it shows loads of useful information, and it gives easy access to some key Git features. Now I'm going to talk through some of my favorite parts, and we're going to go through a workflow that I use to fix up old commits. Let's take a look.
Okay, so I'm in a Git repository for one of my Elixir projects, so we can see here, and I can open Gitk by running the command gitk. This is how I normally run it, but I'm going to bump the font size up a couple of notches so you can see more easily. And as we can see at the top, we have a commit graph with the history of the commits in the repository, and down below we have what is actually a diff view, so if I click on a commit, you can see the diffs coming up down here. Now, because I ran Gitk without any options, we're seeing a relatively minimal setup here. In particular, it's only showing me the current branch that I'm on, which is master in this case, and the direct history of master. So any tags and branches that appear in the direct history of that commit at the head of master. If instead I run gitk -all, which I'll do now, we can see that this shows me other branches as well. So we have this date picker branch up here, which I haven't checked out, but is now showing me in Gitk as well. And if I scroll down, we have like another branch here, which wouldn't have shown up in the previous setting. I tend to run Gitk with the -all flag, as it's still very quick to load, and you just get a lot more information at your fingertips, and it's easy to see the total state of your repository if you can see all the branches that are going on at the same time. If we look more closely at the commit graph at the top, we can see that branches are shown in green. The currently checked out branch is actually shown with bold text. Remotes are shown as well with this kind of pale pink beige starter, and tags are shown in yellow. If I make a couple of changes and stage some of them, we'll see how the index and unstaged changes look in Gitk. Okay, so here we can see that a change that we staged shows up as the green blob here, and a line that we can click on and see the diff for. And the change that we haven't staged shows up here as a second blob in red, and we can also click and check that out. So we can see staged and unstaged changes in Gitk as well. I'll get rid of those for the moment. And we can have a bit more of a look around Gitk. So you might notice as I click on different commits that the SHA ID in the center there is changing as well. It also remains selected at all times. This ties in very well with Linux's default behavior of always copying to the middle mouse button clipboard anything that has been highlighted in the UI. So whenever I navigate around here, we can see that this is being selected, and I can return to the console and paste it in quite easily if I want to. This will help us later. We can see that in this top section, most of the functionality that we can access is exposed through the right-click menu. So if I right-click on a branch, we can either check it out, rename it, or remove it, or copy the name if we want. If I right-click on a tag, it does nothing at all. And if I right-click on a commit, then we have access to quite a lot of functionality here, including cherry picking it or resetting or creating a new branch here if we want. Interestingly, Gitk doesn't allow you to directly create new commits with their own commit messages. Generally speaking, it mostly serves as a viewer, but there are little bits of functionality that are exposed through these menus, such as creating a new branch or cherry picking a commit. Another useful feature is that if we have one commit selected, and then we click on another one, we can diff the selected commit versus the one we're now clicking on. So if I click on diff selected to this, we can see a diff that incorporates the whole of the branch that I'm looking at. Doing this multi-commit diff can be a really useful way of seeing all the changes that happen in a branch or between two versions of your software. If we move down to looking at this middle section, we're going to see the SHA-1 ID field we've talked about already. It's going to contain the SHA-1 ID of any commit that we click on, that we have selected. And then below that we have these two different search fields. The lower search field searches the text currently shown in the diff, So I could type booking here and it will highlight all of those instances through the diff we have below. The upper search field performs different behaviors based on the selection in this box. So for the containing option, it's going to search through all the commit messages in your graph and highlight the commits that match those. So if I type booking in here, we can see that these different commit messages all have booking in them somewhere. If I change this to one of the other settings, well, we have touching paths, which we're going to talk about later, and then these two at the bottom, which have similar functionality and will highlight commits where the string you've typed shows up somewhere in the diff. So if I click add removing string, we still have booking here. This is going to show me commits where booking appears within the diff itself. We can go down and see further examples down through the graph. This can be really useful if you want to find when a variable was changed or a function was called, or perhaps a function call was removed that you're really interested in tracking down. That can be really useful behavior. If we clear that search and have a look at another commit, we can have a look at some of the other settings in this bottom panel. The first three we see here are this diff, old version, new version. So this is just going to change the contents of what's shown below. Either you see the full diff where you have both the red and the green, or you can isolate it to look at just the old version or the new version. This can be quite handy if you want to copy out the old state of the code from a particular commit. There are probably better ways of doing it, but it's rough and ready and quite easy to do. If we switch back to diff, we can see that the lines of context setting is going to change how many lines are shown around each diff. So if we up this, it's going to redraw the diff each time, but we can now see that there's lots and lots of code shown around each diff here. If we take that back to 3, the next setting is ignore space change. This can be really useful for making sense of diffs that involve a lot of indentation change. So if I scroll down, we can see the diff here is quite muddy and difficult to understand. But if I click ignore space change, we can see that it was actually a relatively small diff, which just also changes the indentation of a lot of other code, and that causes confusion. This is just a regular setting on the underlying git diff command, so it's available through other tools and interfaces and the command line, but it is very useful through this as well. The final setting, if we untick this, is this line diff markup words color words option. I don't use this a lot, but it's quite interesting. If I show markup words, for example, we can see that it changes the way the diff is displayed. So instead of showing you two separate lines encapsulating the change, instead it's going to show you what changed within that line and mark up the lost and gained text separately using both these characters and the colors that we're used to. So this can be quite useful. For example, here we can see that whilst the name of the function has changed and the arguments have changed, the fact that there is a function declaration has not changed. This is less apparent if we look at the line diff, where we'd have to compare both of these lines to understand exactly what's going on. Seeing the consistent words between the two parts of the diff, between the old and the new version, can really help us understand exactly what's changed. That said, I don't use this feature a lot. Whilst we're in this section, we can see on the right hand side we've got a list of the files which have changed in this particular commit, in the commit that we have selected. This is quite a useful overview in general, but also there's a right-click menu which exposes some more functionality. I don't use a lot of this, but the first two are very useful. If I click highlight this to or highlight this only, it's going to engage that touching paths feature in this search box here and add the full path to that file into the box. We can see above in the commit graph that it's highlighted all of the commits that change this file in some way. So this can be a really useful way of tracking down changes and understanding what's happening without having to scan through every single commit in your history. You can isolate it down to just the ones that affect the files that you're interested in. And the difference between highlight this to and highlight this only is whether or not this is going to add this file name onto the list or replace the whole list with this file name. So if I do highlight this only, it's going to show just that file name. If I do highlight this to, it adds that file name onto the end of this list and highlights all commits that affect either of those files. Another interesting feature of this diff view below, if we find another commit, is this right-click show origin of this line functionality. So if I click on this, it's going to show me the commit in which this particular line was added. This can be really useful for jumping through your history and understanding a trail of changes that have occurred. So for example, if I choose another commit, like the one up here, and I have a look at the history of this line, it's going to take me to the last time that changed, but then I can go back and have a look at the history of the previous state of that line, and that's going to jump me through. And again, I can follow that back to where that was first introduced. So we can carry on leapfrogging down through history to find exactly what's changed in this part of the code. And this is a really useful, quick way of doing this. It uses the git blame functionality under the hood, but does it in a very kind of quick and efficient manner with this simple UI. If we jump back up to the top, I can show an example of how I use this functionality quite often in my own workflow. So what I'm going to do now is perform a small cleanup on the code base and look at how Gitk and this git blame integration can help us to create some nice clean commits. So what I'm going to do now is jump to this date picker branch, which has this problem on it that I want to tackle. I'm going to run mix credo, which is a linter for Elixir, and this is going to highlight a print statement in the code that I've accidentally left in there. So in Elixir, this io.inspect statement or function call is a common way of doing kind of print statement debugging. I've accidentally left it in there, and Credo is telling me that I should remove it. So I can load up that file. I can search for it and remove it, and then save the file. And if I close down my editor, we now have a choice of how we want to integrate this back into our Git repository. So I could create a new commit. I can add this change there. That's now staged, so we can look in Gitk and see that we have this green blob here with the change that I've staged. Now if I wanted to, I could make a commit which just says kind of whoops or clean up or something, but I'd like a nice clean Git history, and so I'd be more interested in removing this mistake from the commit in which I made it, rather than making an additional commit to clean it up. So this is where this jump to origin functionality is really useful. So I can right click here, show the origin of this line. I can see that this commit is the one where it failed. It already has selected the SHA-1 ID for me. So now I can go and git commit -- fixup and paste in the SHA-1 of that commit. When I run this command, Git's going to make a commit with fixup ! at the start, and then the rest of the commit message of the commit that I'm interested in changing. So if I come back to Gitk and reload this, we can see I've got this fixup commit that references via this commit message this commit that we want to change, that has the original mistake in it of including this io.inspect line. If I come back to my terminal, I can do Git Rebase -i master, and this is going to pop up an editor with the commits in this branch, with the fixup commit already placed correctly against the one that needs to change, and I can save this. And now when I reload Gitk, we can see that that fixup commit is gone, and the io.inspect line is no longer part of this original commit. This gives us a clean history, and if you're working in a team environment with code reviews, you're doing your coworker a favor. With the previous state, your coworker would end up flagging that io.inspect call as they work through the commits one at a time, and then when they reach the end and they realize that you've removed it already, they're going to be frustrated that you hadn't gone back and cleaned up your history properly to begin with. Doing this history cleanup saves everybody involved just a little bit of time, and whilst it takes quite a long time to explain it in this context, because of Gitk and its functionality that's built in, the actual cleanup is relatively quick and painless. It's also worth noting that the rebase portion of this workflow only works as smoothly as it does because of a git config setting I have. If we have a look, we can see that I have rebase auto squash set to true. This is the setting that you need to enable in order for the fix-up line to be automatically moved to the right place in your rebase list when you're doing that. So I hope that's been a useful overview of Gitk and helped you understand why, despite the fact that it's a bit old and a bit ugly, I've kept it in my workflow for quite a number of years now and find it incredibly helpful.
Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Please remember to like and subscribe if you'd like to see more. And if you have any questions or if there are any topics you'd like me to tackle in future videos, please leave a comment below.